Hi, this is Kevin Trainer. Welcome back to part two of my lecture on chapter 6 of Interaction Design 4th edition. And here we begin in about the middle of the chapter where we're talking about interaction design as it relates to interfaces. That's the subject of chapter 6. And for this, it's interfaces for consumer electronics and appliances. So the kinds of things that we're talking about are everyday devices that we're going to use in a home, in a public place, or in a car. They might be washing machines, remote controls, photocopiers, printers, GPSs, those kinds of things. And personal devices, MP3 players, digital clocks, digital cameras. I guess it could include a smartwatch, those kinds of things. They're used for short periods, putting the washing on, watching a program, buying a ticket, changing the time, taking a snapshot. And they need to be usable, ideally with minimal or no learning, because people don't want to adopt things that have a high cost of starting. So if you want to think of a pretty simple device that we might control with a digital interface, let's think about a toaster. And here we have a picture of one with the basic physical controls. We've got the slots to put the bagel halves in, and then we have the push down control that allows us to start the toasting. And it looks like we have a dial to choose how dark we want to do it, and maybe there's a button in the middle of that dial that allows us to pop it up early. I'm not sure. It's kind of hard to tell. So what are some of the research and design issues for these kinds of things? Well, there's a need to design these as transient interfaces with short interactions. Okay, one of the things that happens with these devices a lot is that they change mode as they move from state to state. And so we need to be able to kind of interact with them in their current state, and then we need to be able to move on to interact with them in their next state. Simple interfaces seem to work rather than the complex ones. Of course, that's probably true of everything. And we need to consider the trade-off between soft and hard controls, buttons or keys versus dials or scrolling. I know that I tend to prefer the buttons or keys. The dials and scrolling seem to be a little bit let's go back to this. So there really are more possibilities than this. I'm kind of thinking of my smartwatch, which is probably part of another mobile category, but let's say it's one of these. My smartwatch, which I got over the holidays, has got 5 buttons, okay? 3 on the left side, 2 on the right. And I found this pretty daunting, okay? And they have labels, so they're a little bit hard to find. And as you engage the button, you do get a change in the state on the watch face, so that kind of makes them soft buttons in a way, because they do change their functions depending upon where you are within the dialogue. But one of the things that they're not is your typical kind of mapped soft buttons that we see on some interfaces where, say, there are 4 buttons and we keep changing the labels that are over the buttons, and so you always know which button, or you have a pretty strong hint about which button to go to. I found this pretty frustrating when I got it. My wife's very good at these kinds of interfaces, though, and luckily she she figured it out and read the book and showed me how to use it, because I'm one of those people who only reads the manual in cases of electric shock. And with a little tutoring from her, I've become pretty good at this one. Mobile. Well, here we are. They'd throw this into mobile if not. They'd throw my watch into mobile if not into appliances. They're handheld devices intended to be used while on the move. They've become pervasive, increasingly used in all aspects of everyday and working life. The apps that we have that run on the mobiles have greatly expanded, used in restaurants to take orders, for car rentals, supermarkets for checking out, in the streets for multi-user gaming, and education to support lifelong learning. A lot of transportation applications. I use one on my train that I take to Milwaukee. It keeps track of my electronic ticket and how much is left, and it gives them a code to scan and all kinds of stuff. The advent of the iPhone app was a real big thing. Of course, now we don't only have iPhone apps, we have Android apps as well. It was a whole new user experience that was designed primarily for people to enjoy, and enjoy we have. Many apps are not designed for any need you want to want or use, but purely for idle moments to have some fun. Well, I would say that that's a want. Well, okay, so they're not designed for any need, they're designed for wants. There's a good description in the text of this IBeer application, which is kind of a nice party trick. Not one that I've had, but apparently one that's popular with the authors. And the ingenious use of the accelerometer that's inside the phone with IBeer, it's really made a lot of things go. So there's just all kinds of games and applications that work better when motion can be detected and when the orientation of the device can be detected. So here's our iBeer app. I'd much rather have the actual beer, I think. QR codes are pretty cool stuff. Not only can you use a cell phone to scan a QR code, but in the case of transportation apps that I mentioned before, like the one that I use for Amtrak and the ones that I use for the airlines, you can display a QR code on your a smartphone, and their scanners can read it from your a smartphone. So pretty typically, that's how they tell. That's how they find your ticketing information. Mobile challenges: smaller screens, a small number of physical keys, and a restricted number of controls. Well, one of the things that's kind of interesting is that, yeah, screens were initially smaller, but I, for instance, have an iPhone Plus, and a lot of my friends have equally big Android phones, and really being small is not a problem anymore. A small number of physical keys is probably a good thing if you create enough touchable controls. So the problem with the physical keys is you have to remember what they do. So my iPhone has, I guess, 3 or 2, depending upon how you count. Or perhaps 4 if you want to count very generously. And I use them a whole lot less than I use the buttons on my smartphone, because my smartwatch, my smartwatch is a Garmin Fenix 3 HR, and it has the watch face is graphical, but it's not touch sensitive, so the buttons are all physical. Whereas my iPhone 6 Plus, the physical buttons are few, but most of the interaction is done with the touchable screen. And I think that's probably a good thing. To the extent that we've had things that are small to deal with, well, we've come up with all kinds of things like roller wheels, rocker dials, lips on the face of phones, two-way and four-way directional keypads. The fact is that the preference these days seems to go towards soft keys and icons because we have such great touch screens. Usability and preference varies, depends on the dexterity and commitment of the user, although this kind of general iPhone touch interface is really kind of taken over. Okay, so there was a time when you might want something that works like the iPhone and the Android, or you might want something that works like a BlackBerry, but that ship has sailed. BlackBerry is either dead or all but dead. Some research and design issues. Mobile interfaces can be tricky and cumbersome to use for those with poor manual dexterity or fat fingers. The key concern is the hit area, so the amount of area that's going to be sensitive to the touch. The space needs to be big enough for fat fingers like mine. If it's too small, you might accidentally press the wrong key. And I've gotten better with that over time, but certainly I'm not as good as other people like my wife or my adult children who seem to have a much better touch than I do. They've also got smaller fingers, I think. Okay, let's talk about speech applications. So this is where a person talks with the system that has a spoken language application, something like a timetable or a travel planner. It's used most for inquiring about very specific information like flight times or performing a transaction or buying a ticket. It's also used by people with disabilities because it might, for instance, be used to recognize speech and turn it into text, or text and turn it into speech. So we might have speech recognition word processors, page scanners, web readers, and home control systems. Have speech interfaces come of age? I'd say they have. I mean, we have, in the last, say, 5 years, we've turned a corner where we have things like Siri on the iPhone and the equivalent Google Assistant and the equivalent Windows Assistant, and we have the product from Amazon that you talk with, and they do a pretty good job of listening and conversing with you. So this cartoon that we're looking at, where we misunderstand each other, I mean, we do get some funny misunderstandings, but they do pretty well, and people seem to be fairly confident in using them. The most popular use for speech interfaces is currently for call routing, although with the advent of things like Siri and those devices I talked about, we're using those more and more. So I think that's certainly a competitor for the most use. We can have color-led speech where the user states their need in their own words, like I'm having problems with my voicemail. The idea is that they would automatically be forwarded to the appropriate service or person. And they're asking us to talk about our own experience. We talk about these things a lot in our house because my wife is a project manager for a travel management company, and so they have a lot of speech applications that they use to moderate the interaction between their travel agents and their customers. And they have really invested a lot of money and time into making them high quality. And so whenever we're calling somebody else, she's explaining how they have either done a great job or a poor job, or they spent a lot or didn't spend enough on their speech applications. So we have a lot of fun with that here at Casa Trainer. The format of the experiences it can be different. You can have directed dialogues where the system is in control of the conversation. So they ask specific questions and they require specific responses. More flexible systems allow the user to take the initiative. For instance, I'd like to go to Paris next Monday for 2 weeks. There's more chance of an error because once you begin to talk, as soon as the user begins to think of the system as a human, then they might outstrip the capability. Guided prompts can help get the callers back on track. Sorry, I did not get all that. Did you say that you wanted to fly next Monday? Okay, and the fancier systems are just up to this level right now. I think that our major complaint is how to get out of the dialogue. So typically, you can just say operator, and they'll give you to an agent. Say either operator or agent, and they'll say, oh, I think I heard you said that you wanted to talk to an agent. Would you like to talk to an agent? Because there's a lot of times when you get forwarded these things and you don't want to be there. And that's when you're when you're tempted to curse at them. At least I am. It's always funny to curse at this kind of technology. Now that's probably reflects on my character in a bad way, but it's still sometimes fun. How to research and design issues for speech. How to design a system that can keep the conversations on track. So we want to help people navigate efficiently through a menu system. You know, these things where they have you, they give you a list of things and then you have to choose, you know, press or say 1, press or say 2. Well, we get back to some of the cognitive things. You can only keep some of these things in your mind at the same time. So these conversations that are more tree-like, where they say, do you want to do this or that? This. Then do you want to do this subpart or that subpart? Those help a lot. The ones where you have to remember a list are pretty bad indeed. They have, instead of using computer-generated speech, they have used voice actors that record the full vocabulary. In the case of using these things commercially, like for clients and stuff, They will even record the properly pronounced client name, particularly if you have a client that doesn't have an easily computer pronounced name. You want to make sure that you're calling the name of their company the right thing, or the name of their university the right thing. And so typically one of the ups and extras is to record a bunch of names and words that are pretty specific to your client base and your application. And you usually can, you can pick the actor. I mean, there are companies that just have voice actors for just this thing. There are whole companies that, what do? They provide the talent for this kind of work. Okay, what's next? Well, pens are next. I'm going to have to confess that I'm not a pen fan. Okay, but many are. These will enable people to write, draw, select, and move objects at an interface using light pens or styluses, or would that be styli? I'm not sure. We capitalize on the well-honed drawing skills developed from childhood. Digital pens like a Noto use a combination of ordinary ink pen with a digital camera that digitally records everything written with the pen on special paper, kind of geographic paper. That's a cool app. Pros and cons. It allows users to quickly and easily annotate existing documents. It can be difficult to see options on the screen because the user's hand can include part of it when writing. That's my major complaint about all of the credit card things that you have to sign. There's usually not a good place to rest your hand. And if you rest your hand on the screen, it goes bad. They can have lag, or they can feel kind of clunky. So generally this pen stuff, we used to have these light pens that we would use to select text. I mean, this is back when we were using green screen terminals. And people have always been kind of interested in pen interfaces. Currently, for teaching, they have these things. They have these kind of tablets where you can draw. And I bought a couple of those. I've been through, I think, 2 of those that I decided I didn't like. And it's better to talk without the drawing. They just seemed kind of clunky themselves. So I personally have been disappointed by pens, including the pens that we signed on the credit card machines with. Your mileage may vary. Okay, how about the touch interface? Well, we're using a lot of this more and more. So touch screens such as walk-up kiosks detect the presence and location of a person's touch on the display. Multi-touch can support a range of dynamic fingertip actions, swiping, flicking. We've got that pinching where you pull your fingers together, or reverse pinching where you're pulling things apart. Pushing and tapping. So there are all kinds of things that you can do. Some of the touch displays, some of the newer Apple ones they've been talking about, I don't have one that does this, can tell the difference between touching and pushing, which can have a different meaning. And so there's a whole other level of interaction that's possible there. It's now used for many kinds of displays such as smartphones, iPods, tablets, and tabletops. One of the nice things is you seem to be able to create a kiosk kind of interactivity with just a tablet like an iPad. I'm always impressed when I go into an Apple store and they've got a bunch of these iPads connected up on their little cables so they don't walk out the door. but they typically have some kind of app running on them that's either a demonstration or some kind of interactive thing. And pretty much the same kind of things that you could have put onto a more dedicated kiosk in times past, you can get just right out of a tablet. So pretty cool stuff. Research and design issues for touch. More fluid and direct styles of interaction involving freehand and pen-based gestures. Again, pens, boo, I'm not a pen guy. Freehand stuff, I think it's very promising. I certainly I've interacted with devices that can sense freehand gestures. I just haven't learned them, and I think that learning them is going to be kind of the challenge. Core design concerns include whether size, orientation, and shape of the touch at display affects things like collaboration. It's much faster to scroll through wheels, carousels, and bars of thumbnail images. Or how do you compare that to finger flicking? I mean, there are times when finger flicking just wears you out. So there are some opportunities for us as interaction design practitioners to create enough, to use enough interaction idioms to give some choice for scrolling kinds of opportunities depending upon how fine of a scroll or how gross of a scroll we want to do. They're more cumbersome and error-prone and slower to type using a virtual keyboard on a touch display than using a physical keyboard. That's kind of interesting. The fact is that that was a big complaint for me when I was a new user of a virtual keyboard. It's less of a complaint now. Some of that auto-completion technology that Apple has built into the iOS apps, and I'm sure that the other vendors have too, it gives you a payback for having a soft keyboard. If I can type just the first letter or two of the word and it can suggest the rest of the word, then that can make up for a lot of the speed loss that I get from not being able to use touch typing. Here we're talking about some new ways that we might be able to interact. Here's a typing approach where if you look at the screen here, it's that we don't have to pick up our finger and put it back down. Just pausing and changing a direction is enough to tell the device which key we want to push. And potentially we could save a lot of energy by not having to tap quite so much. It's not something that I've used, but it's called the swipe interface, and I think it's a cool idea. I'm always a little worried on these. Some of these I take too easily, and some of these I don't. And probably you're going to be at the mercy of the sensibilities of your user, but having these as possibilities, I think, is a great thing. Next, we're going to talk about air-based gestures, and I mentioned them a little bit before. Classically, they use camera recognition, sensor, and computer vision techniques to try to decipher what gestures you are making with your body, your arms, and your hands. One of the systems that does this is called Kinect. Movements are mapped onto a variety of gaming motions such as swinging, bowling, hitting, and punching. the players are represented on the screen as avatars doing the same actions. It's not all games, though. One of the things that you can do that we're showing here with the picture is, for instance, have a gestural interface for, say, surgeons to navigate their way through information systems without having to touch keyboards or mice or other physical devices and break sterility. Here we have a picture that's kind of getting into one of our next subjects, because here's a system that through kind of wearable technology here is able to detect the violin playing that's going on, and also through some haptic feedback to give some coaching. Research and design issues here. How does a computer recognize and delineate users' gestures? So there are some positional things. There are some moving gesture things. There's all kinds of possibilities. Thing is for us to settle on a dialect or dialects that are going to be effective. Does holding a control device feel more intuitive than controller-free gestures? Well, for gaming, I think it maybe does. I know playing the Wii and you're supposed to be playing golf, having a little control device to swing is pretty helpful. Although I found that when we were doing bowling, it just seemed kind of odd the way we were doing it, but it seemed to work. So for those gamey things, having a controller seemed fine. But certainly if I were a surgeon and trying to navigate an information system or control some kind of medical device, I don't want to touch anything. So I would like to do some kind of free air hand gestures. We touched on this a minute ago, these haptic or tactile feedback systems. We saw the picture of the violinist who was in a harness, and part of that system is to give haptic feedback to the violinist to change their posture and things like that. So you get feelings of touch, either being squeezed or maybe a buzz or some kind of pressure. You can enrich a user experience or nudge them to correct their error. It can also be used to simulate a sense of touch between remote people who want to communicate, and somewhere in the text is a discussion, I think a couple of chapters ago, of some kind of a hug jacket or a hug blanket or something like that for maybe grandparents and grandkids. So as a soon-to-be grandfather, somehow I think that might be a good idea. Although my grandchild will probably only be 10 minutes away, so probably easier to get in the car than to pull out the device. Here's our violinist again. So they're getting real-time vibrotactile feedback. It provides nudges when playing incorrectly. It uses motion capture, and the nudges are vibrations on the arms and hands. Okay. Probably better than having some old man with a stick keep hitting you and saying, Kevin, that's wrong, that's wrong. Although that's quite a circuit board she has on her back there. Perhaps this is the prototype. Uh, Research and design issues having to do with haptic interfaces. Where best to place the actuators on the body, whether to use a single touch or a sequence of touches, when to buzz and how intense. My smartwatch buzzes reasonably often. One of the applications tells me that I have to move. Another one of the applications I have interacts with my smartphone, and it gives me news alerts that are coming in on the smartphone. So every time the president signs a new executive order, my wrist buzzes. And I've not decided whether that's good or bad, but at least I have the potential to be alerted before the end of the world. How does the wearer feel it in different contexts? What kind of new smartphone, smartwatch apps can use vibrotactile creatively? So slow tapping to feel like water dropping that is meant to indicate that it's about to rain. Heavy tapping to indicate that a thunderstorm is looming. Now, these are the things we're just going to discover, and somebody's going to come up with a formula that works and put it in a product, and we're all going to be trying to copy it. What about multimodal interfaces? Well, they're meant to provide an enriched and complex user experiences. Multiplying how information is experienced and detected using different modalities: touch, sight, speech, and sound. So this is going to cross over into a lot of the interfaces that we talked about before. It's just a combination of them. Potentially, we could support more flexible, efficient, and expressive means of human-computer interaction. Most commonly is speech and vision. Okay? Now, probably the multimodal device that I use the most often is my GPS when I'm in my car. So I'm looking at the display that's visual, and then it talks to me. So that's audio. And I like to have the audio cues because then I know that there are times when I need to look over and see the map as it's coming up and changing. And there are other times when I can just wait for the next audio cue. So the combination of those modes create a pretty rich experience. Research and design issues for multimodal. The need to recognize and analyze speech, gesture, and eye gaze. So all of the all of the challenges that we had with these individually, plus the issues of how to do this in a combined way. Okay, so it's just that much more complex. What's gained from combining different input and outputs? Is talking and gesturing as humans do with other humans a natural way of interacting with a computer? And this is something that comes up, I think, in a couple places in the chapter and in the course and text, which is there's always this kind of assumption that we have that we'd like to interact with systems the way that we interact with other humans, and yet when you really think about it, other humans are pretty frustrating to interact with, sometimes compared to the devices that we are able to interact with. So things that mimic the way that we would interact with another human might be better or might be worse. Certainly a lot of research opportunities there. In an earlier chapter, we talked about these shareable technologies that create common experiences. Okay, so shareable interfaces are designed for more than one person to use. We provide multiple inputs and sometimes allow simultaneous input by co-located groups. We might have large wall displays where people use their own pens or gestures. We might have interactive tabletops, and we've seen some pictures of those, and we've got a couple coming up, where small groups interact with information using their fingertips. Again, probably my experience is watching this go on television. I typically get a kick out of these crime shows where they're trying to sift through some data. This is always big on Hawaii 5.0, which I wasn't a fan of till it was recommended by my mother-in-law, and now we watch it all the time. And they love their table, where they all get at the table and different people sort of interact with the data, and typically they only interact with it one at a time. But you get an idea about how your work life might be different with some of these digitally engineered common experiences. So products that they talk about in the text: Diamond Touch, Smart Table, and Surface. So smart boards are interesting. People have been putting them in the classrooms that I've been teaching in for about maybe 15 years now. And I've been avoiding them for maybe about 15 years now. So I'm not a smartboard fan. They're always too finicky for me. There's always, oh, don't do that to them or do that to them. So the best thing I can do with a smartboard is to get them out of the way to get to the whiteboard or the projector screen. Again, your mileage is going to vary. Here's the Diamond Touch Tabletop. So you've got two users interacting with graphical objects at the same time on the same tabletop. That looks cool. Advantages: you can provide a large interactional space that can support flexible group working. It can be used by multiple users at the same time. So you can point to and touch information being displayed. You can simultaneously view the interactions and have the same shared point of reference as others. You can support more equitable participation compared with groups using a single PC. And this is kind of the scenario that I get on Hawaii 5.0, in that again, these people are typically interacting with their table one at a time, but people don't have to get up and down and change all kinds of, we don't have to say, well, I'm going to drive now. No, I'm going to drive now. No, we can all drive, and we can all be kind of standing around the Hawaii 5.0 table. Research and design issues. Well, perhaps we need more fluid and direct styles of interaction involving freehand and pen-based gestures. We have core design concerns, including whether size, orientation, and shape of the display have an effect on collaboration. I've got to say that these table-oriented things where people collect around them seem very appealing to me. They seem very group-centric. Boards that people collect in front of, maybe less so, but still they have a lot of possibilities. Providing larger size tabletops does not improve group working, but encourages more division of labor. So there are a lot of design and research opportunities going on here. And again, we're trying to invent new ways of working, and we will. So what is on Hawaii 5.0 today is going to be in our conference room tomorrow. And probably better than the Hawaii 5.0 version by far. Okay, what about tangible interfaces? Well, what do we mean? Well, it's a type of sensor-based interaction where physical objects, something like, say, bricks, are coupled with digital representation. So there's a physical object that we're going to manipulate, and then we're going to sense that in our information system. So when a person manipulates the physical object, it causes a digital effect to occur, like in animation. Digital effects can take place in a number of media and places, or can be embedded in the physical object. So there are three products that they discuss in the text: chromarium cubes, flow blocks, and ERP. So chromarium cubes, when turned over, digital animations of color are mixed on an adjacent wall. It facilitates creativity and collaborative exploration. I've not used them, but I've always wanted to. I've never had access to them. Flow blocks, depicting changing numbers and lights embedded in the blocks. They vary depending on how they're connected together. Again, I find this very appealing, although I've not really done anything with it hands-on. And ERP, physical models of buildings moved around on a tabletop, used in combination with tokens for wind and shadows, to do some kind of structural wind modeling. So what are some of the benefits of those kind of tangible apps in the interface world? Can be held in both hands and combined and manipulated in ways not possible using other interfaces. It allows for more than one person to explore the interface together. Objects can be placed on top of each other, beside each other, inside each other. Encourages different ways of representing and exploring a problem space. And I've just got to say that in science fiction, when they discover these kind of objects, they always have, in good science fiction, they always have this kind of tangible computing interface quality. So if it's good science fiction, perhaps it's good science. I can think of, I'm thinking back to 2 or 3 science fiction stories where I was like, I wish we had that device. People are able to see and understand situations differently. They can lead to greater insight, learning, and problem solving with other kinds of interfaces. So they're very discovery oriented. And they can facilitate creativity and reflection. So this whole area is very exciting to me. Haven't really gotten a lot of opportunity to do it myself. Very high on my list for stuff that I want to play with. Here's an example of VoxBox. I hope these things are more appealing than they appear, because they the description of these in the text is much more engaging than what they look like, which is, what they look like? They look like activities that I would buy in we have a store in our town that sells materials to teachers. So you can go buy posters to put up on the wall, activity books, flashcards, manipulating things, things to count. It looks like something that you would buy at that store, which I think would be cool, but only if you're dealing with children. So this is a tangible system that gathers opinions at events through playful and engaging interaction. Again, I'm hoping that we are tangibilizing and engaging with younger folks here, because it just hasn't got that science fiction cool that I would like it to have. Research and design issues for tangible. We need to develop new conceptual frameworks that identify novel and specific features. We need to discover the right kind of coupling action to use between the physical action and the digital effect, because typically we're using the physical component as an input device, or perhaps an output device. We can really use it for both. But there's some digital experience that's going on at the same time that we need to track. So really have two things going on. If it's to support learning, then an explicit mapping between the action and the effect is critical. If it's for entertainment, then it can be better designed to be more implicit or unexpected, because the little bit of serendipity can be fun. On the other hand, if we're learning how to take out somebody's appendix and we cut off their left arm, well, perhaps that's not fun at all. What kind of physical artifact to use? So some of the ones we've talked about, bricks, cubes, and other component sets are most commonly used because of flexibility and simplicity. We're looking for general objects, a lot of times, that you can combine into assemblies. Stickies and cardboard tokens can also be used for placing material onto a surface. Yes, but is it as cool? That's what I would say. We've worked our way up to augmented and mixed reality. So augmented reality, virtual representations are superimposed on physical devices or objects. Mixed reality, views of the real world are combined with views of a virtual environment. We have many applications including medicine, games, flying, and everyday exploring. And two that they talk about in the text that I find very promising are one where we take sort of like X-ray-ish diagnostic information and project it, say, right onto the patient. So say a surgeon could say, oh, okay, we're cutting right here. Okay, right here next to the belly button, right by that mole. Okay. And some other things where they might take a diagnostic application for an engine and then be able to indicate on that engine how locate the part that has got to be fixed. It's just like, oh, we're taking off that part. Okay, and if the resolution is high enough, yes, we're going to loosen these two nuts, this one and this one, which we're pointing out with some kind of a laser pointer. So the examples, which I forgot was on this slide, we talked about the medicine one, being able to project the X-ray or scan right on the body. In air traffic control, which I didn't talk about, dynamic information about aircraft overlaid on a video screen showing the real planes landing, taking off, and taxiing helps identify planes that are difficult to make out. And of course, these are two high stakes areas, medicine and air traffic control. So these are places where we're trying to squeeze out errors more and more, and bringing these kinds of technologies has the promise of reducing errors even further, which has a real value to the society. Here's an augmented map where we are, say, taking a map and then we're projecting data on top of it in order to make the mapping a more interactive experience. Here's an interesting kind of application where we're taking a 3D character to act as a personal tour guide at a science museum. Top Gear being a show, and James May being, I think, a British TV personality. And here's an example of an augmented reality application. Perhaps more interesting to the Brits than us here in the US. What are some of the research and design issues in augmented reality? Well, what kind of digital augmentation are we going to use? Where are we going to use it in the physical environment, and when? It needs to stand out but not to distract from an ongoing task. So, for instance, if we're going to point out parts to the auto mechanic, that's great. But, of course, we don't want to blind them with the laser when they go to take the part off. So there's some real how intrusive to make it kind of issues. And then we need to be able to align with real world objects. So if we want to be able to point to the exact place on the engine, or so exact of, this is the head of the bolt that you're going to have to loosen, then you're going to need quite a bit of resolution and pretty sophisticated object finding in your application. So research and design issues, what kind of digital augmentation, and what kind of device? So are we going to have a specialized device? Are we going to adapt a smartphone, a heads-up display? Are we going to do some kind of other thing? I mean, there's all kinds of possibilities here. Come on back. Right here. Let's talk about wearables. The first developments in this area were headwear and eyewear mounted cameras that enabled the user to record what was seen and access to digital information. Since we've expanded the line, we have jewelry, head-mounted caps, smart fabrics, glasses, shoes, and jackets have all been used. And we've got really both sides of the interaction. So we've got some sensing, okay, or recording, and then we have some ways of giving output to the user. So we have both input and output aspects of this. So applications include automatic diaries, tour guides, cycle indicators, and fashion clothing. Google Glass was a really popular thing. It didn't last that long. It was pretty short-lived. But Google Glass allowed you to record your life as you experience it, and also to display some computer-based information the pros and cons. One, it was cool. I mean, that was the pro. Cool if you were able to master it. Cons, perhaps safety issues if you were distracted by it. Politeness issues if those around you were distracted by it. And maybe privacy issues if you were recording things that other people thought were better left unrecorded. So, research and design issues for these wearables. Well, we've got comfort, so they need to be light and small, not get in the way. They need to be fashionable, preferably hidden in the clothing. We get back to the crime and spy shows, right? Hygiene, is it possible to wash or clean the clothing once worn? You know, can we share these things? Can we share a pair of Google Glass glasses? Well, maybe not. Ease of wear, how easy is it to remove the gadgetry and replace it? Usability, how does the user control the devices that are embedded in clothing? So there's a lot of possibilities here, and the profit motive being what it is, people are going to continue to do this until they hit things that we want to buy. Google Glass probably wasn't the product opportunity that Google had maybe hoped it might turn into. I think they saw it more as an experiment than a real life product. But that's okay. That's what Google likes to do. So what exactly is going to hit in this area, I'm not sure, but I know something will. Next, robots and drones. Okay. So one of the nice things about this text is that in the third edition we talked about robots, but not drones. And now, a lot of things going on with drones. Now we're talking about robots and drones, and I really like that about the authors. They put a lot of effort into keeping their text current, which is why we're already on the fourth edition. And the first one was in 2000. So they don't have a long life. So there's 4 types of robot that we want to think about. Remote robots used in hazardous settings, like in a melting down nuclear reactor. Domestic robots helping us around the house. Pet robots used as human companions. Sociable robots that work collaboratively with humans and communicate and socialize with them as if they were our peers. Some advantages. Pet robots are assumed to have therapeutic qualities, helping to reduce stress and loneliness. Remote robots can be controlled to investigate bombs and other dangerous materials. I know they've used a lot of robots at the Fukushima nuclear facility where they had a nuclear accident. They haven't been able to achieve everything that they wanted to with the robots, but they certainly have had good safety and health advantages. So let's talk a bit about drones. Drones are unmanned aircraft. Sometimes watercraft would also be referred to as drones, that are controlled remotely and used in a number of contexts. They may be used for entertainment, such as carrying drinks and food to people at festivals and parties. Agricultural applications, such as flying them over vineyards and fields to collect data that's useful to farmers. Or helping to track poachers in wildlife parks in Africa. And we have a lot of things. I mean, we've people talking about delivering things to our homes. Uh, I recently read an article about a scheme to deliver transplantable human organs. Um, the life of a transplantable human organ is pretty short, and the ability to get it, say, from a hospital to the airport quickly is sometimes hard to do. They do it with helicopters and stuff. Well, there are people who are thinking they can do that with drones. They can fly low and stream photos to a ground station where the images can be stitched together into maps. They can be used to determine the health of a crop or when it's the best time to harvest a crop. So I think what's really interesting about drones is that we don't really talk about a lot of the devices that we might want to control, but remote control cars and planes and boats and stuff have been around for a long time. And initially they had pretty analog interfaces, but in these days the systems that control them are digital. And so it's pretty interesting. We get a lot of possibilities about just the types of interactions that we can do. I mean, with airplane drones used by the military, they typically get a TV signal. So the operator, who sometimes is not even on the same continent, can see what can be seen from the drone in the air. So there are all kinds of possibilities there. I mean, you may agree that those are good or not agree and say that those are bad applications, but certainly these kinds of ways of interacting with drones have gotten fairly rich in the digital era. So here's a picture of a drone in a vineyard, and the idea here is that for people in agriculture who have a pretty big vineyard or farm or whatever they have, the conditions in one part of their vineyard or farm could be different than the other conditions. So you just can't look at the grapes that are by the hacienda and assume that all the other ones are like that. You really have to get out and inspect them all. And this is a pretty inexpensive and comprehensive way to do it. What are some of the research and design issues with robots and drones? So, how do humans react to physical robots that are designed to exhibit human-like behaviors, like facial expressions, compared with virtual ones? Okay. There's always been this feeling that there's going to be a pushback with humanoid robots that are too lifelike. I don't know that we've really established that. There's probably I think we talk about some research in the chapter briefly, but those are certainly interesting questions. Should robots be designed to be human-like or look like and behave like robots that serve a clearly defined purpose? Should the interaction be designed to enable people to interact with the robots as if they were another human being, or more human computer-like, pressing buttons or command line interfaces or something like that? Then we have issues like, is it acceptable to use unmanned drones to take a series of images or videos of fields, towns, and private property without the consent of the people who might be recorded? Well, there are a lot of us who think that that presents a pretty serious privacy issue. How about brain-computer interfaces? This is one that we didn't have a couple of editions ago. So, brain-computer interfaces provide a communication pathway between a person's brain waves and an external device, such as a cursor on a screen. A person is trained to concentrate on the task, for like moving the cursor. Brain-computer interfaces work through detecting changes in neural functioning in the brain. BCI apps include games and potentially enabling people who are paralyzed to control robots. So these things are pretty cool. Again, not anything I've had a chance to try myself, but certainly a lot that I've seen on TV, usually in a fictional setting. So it's always kind of interesting how close these things are to the reality. Here we have two subjects playing the brain ball game using a brain-computer interface. So they're trying to control balls with their brains. Okay, so we talked about a lot of kind of interfaces. So now you've got to think about what kind of interface you want. All right. And, there are times when we as the practitioner find people, we find our clients already wanting a particular kind of interface, and we're either reinforcing that or trying to deflect them towards what we think are more promising opportunities. But when we're thinking about it in the big picture, all kinds of questions are going to come up. Would multimedia be better than tangible interfaces for learning? Is speech as effective as a command-based interface? Is a multi-modal interface more effective than a monomodal interface? That's one that only has one mode. Will wearable interfaces be better than mobile interfaces for helping people find information in foreign cities? I doubt it, but we're going to find out. Are virtual environments the ultimate interface for playing games? Well, maybe not board games. I love board games. Will shareable interfaces be better at supporting communication and collaboration compared with using network desktop PCs? Well, these don't have one answer, okay? I mean, think about our point of view in this course. Our point of view is that it's going to depend upon the task at hand. It's going to depend upon the abilities and the sensibilities of our user. It's going to probably depend upon our budget. It's going to depend upon feasible alternatives. It's going to depend upon a lot of stuff. But these are all going to be interesting questions because we're going to need to balance these things off before we make our choices. So the first bullet point here about which interface is kind of what I just said. It's going to depend on the task, the users, the context, the cost, the robustness. But it's also going to depend on trends, right? Now we have a trend that mobile platforms are taking over from PCs. It's not just a style or a fad. I mean, there's just, these things trend because of the dynamics in the marketplace. Speech interfaces are also being used much more for a variety of commercial services. Appliance and vehicle interfaces are becoming more important. Shareable and tangible interfaces entering our homes, schools, and public places and workplaces is something that we're seeing. So a combination of we've got to really understand the needs, and we've got to really understand the audience, and then we've got to be in touch with things as they're changing in our world and trending. So the summary of the chapter I have here, and I'm never one for going through chapter summaries all too much. So I'm going to pause here and just kind of summarize from my perspective. This again is a bit of a primer and a bit of an encyclopedia. Okay, there's enough in any one of the areas to get you started and get you oriented, get you thinking about things you haven't thought about in a while. The text has a lot of references to research, to other resources that will get you going to greater depth on any of these. And I hope you enjoyed it. So I'm going to say bye until next time. Bye-bye.